This is the video for 8-5, working backwards. What you're going to do today is that you are going to not solve for the volume. You're going to be given the volume, but you're going to solve for one of the missing pieces in the formula, whether it's the radius or the height. So to solve for a missing measurement when given the volume, you have to sub known values into the formula, then solve it like a normal equation. So for a cylinder, we have to use the cylinder formula, volume equals pi r squared h. For a cone, we have to use the cone formula, volume equals 1/3 pi r squared h. And for a sphere, we have to use the sphere formula, 4/3 pi r cubed. Now, you're going to be doing some things on the calculator today that you've never done before. You are going to be taking the square root of a number, and you are going to be taking the cube root of a number. Why we have to do that is because the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. The opposite of cubing a number is to take the cube root of a number. So when you're solving, when that very last step, and you have something like this, when you have r squared equals 36, because you're going to end up with this when you go to solve for the radius in both a cylinder and a cone. So you're going to eventually get down to this, and this is going to be the last step. In order to solve for r, you're going to have r squared equals 36. Well, we don't want r squared, we want r. So the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. So the way that you do that on your calculator is you have to type in second button and then the x squared button and then your number. So when we want the square root of 36, you have to type in second x squared, which is really the square root button, and then your number 36 and hit equals. So the opposite of, taking the square root of r squared, the square root and the square just cancel each other out. So that's how we get r all by itself. And then you hit second x squared button, which is really the square root, 36, hit equals, and that is 6. The square root is really what number times the same number gives you this 36. So 6 times 6 is 36. When we go to take the cube root of the number, when we're dealing with spheres, because you have that r cubed in the formula for spheres, to solve, when you're eventually going to solve it, you're going to get r cubed equals 27. Well, the opposite of cubing a number is to take the cube root of a number. Now, it sort of looks like the square root symbol, but it has a 3 in the little check mark thing right there. So we're taking the cube root of 3. Now, on your calculator, there is no cube root button specifically. There is a square root button, but there's not a cube root. What we have to do is you have to type in 3 first, because later on in other math classes, later on down the road in high school, you might take the 4th root of a number, or a 5th root of the number. Well, we want the 3rd root or the cube root of the number. So we have to type in 3 and then second button, caret button. You'll notice that above the caret button on your calculator, there's a little square root symbol, but then it has an X in there. By typing the 3 first, it's placing that 3 inside there. So we end up with something like this, which is the cube root of the number. So you hit 3, second button, caret button for the cube root, and then your number. So 3, second button, caret button, 27. The opposite of cubing a number is the cube root of a number. So that's how we get r all by itself. And the cube root of 27 is just 3, because 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. So again, you're going to have to use those buttons on your calculator. Please refer back to this page if you need help with cubing or taking the square root or the cube root of a number. So this is the type of questions that you're going to have. I'm going to do one of each type of question that you could possibly have. So in a cylinder, you're going to be given the volume. All right, you're given that answer already. We're looking for the radius, and you're given the height. So I think it's very helpful to write down the formula first and sub in what you know first. So do we know the volume? Yes, we do. We know that the volume is 722.5663103. Yes, you have to write down that whole decimal, and yes, you have to type that whole decimal into your calculator. Equals Pi stays pi. That doesn't change. We already know that pi is in that formula. Do we know what r is? No, we don't. So that r is just going to stay r squared. Do we know the height? Yes, we do. Right? So we know that the height is 2.3. So I'm going to sub that 2.3 into the formula. Now, this is what we have. We have to solve for r. The way that you're going to be doing this, because you're multiplying all three of these terms together, pi times r squared times 2.3, the opposite of multiplying is dividing. Think about a one-step equation. If we had 5x equals 20, that really means 5 times x. To solve for x, we'd have to divide. That's the same thing that we want to do here. We want to divide by everything except for the letter that you're solving for. Let me say that again. You want to divide by everything except for the letter that we're solving for. So to get this r squared by itself, we need to divide by pi times 2.3. We want to divide by everything except for the letter that we're solving for. You must put these in parentheses. If you don't put them in parentheses, you will get the wrong answer. So divide by everything except for the letter that we're solving for. Just like how we're normally solving an equation, whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side. Now, why do we have to divide by pi times 2.3? Well, remember, we're trying to solve for r. So we're trying to get that r all by itself. Therefore, what happens is these pi's cancel out. These 2.3s cancel out because we're dividing by them. And all that we're left with on that right-hand side is r squared. Now, you're going to type this whole thing right directly into the calculator, exactly how it is. 722.566301 divided by parentheses, pi button, times 2.3, close your parentheses and hit equals. When you do that, you should get exactly 100. Well, 100 is not our answer. 100 is what r squared is. We don't want r squared, we want r. The opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. Whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other. The opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root, so that r just gets all by itself. The square root of 100. So you're going to hit second x squared button, which is really your square root button, and then 100, and you get 10. So our answer is that the radius is 10, because the square root of 100 is 10. 10 times 10 is 100. Take a look at the next one. We still have a cylinder, but this time we know the radius. We're looking for the height. So sub in what you know first. So we have 526.6817252 equals pi stays pi. The radius we know this time, so times 5.2 squared. But this time we're looking for the height. So that first step is to sub in everything that you know. The second step is to divide by everything except for the letter that we're solving for. We're solving for this h. So we want to divide by pi. We want to divide by 5.2 squared. We need to put that inside parentheses. Whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side of the equal sign. So we want to divide by pi times 5.2 squared on both sides. Therefore, these pi's cancel out. These 5.2 squareds cancel out. All we're left with on the right-hand side is an equals h. You're going to type this directly into the calculator, exactly how it says. 526.6817252 divided by parentheses pi times 5.2 squared, and close your parentheses. So when you do that, you get an answer of 6.2. Now, that is our answer. You don't have to take the square root on this one. Why not? Well, we just have h all by itself. We did it in the last time because we had an r squared. You only take the square root when you have an r squared. We don't have an r squared here. We have an h that's all by itself. Now, if it was something like h squared, but that's not part of our formula, but if it was part of our formula, then we would have to take the square root. But we have an h all by itself, which is exactly what we want. So those were the two for the cylinder. Let's move on to the cone formula. So again, this time we're given the volume of the cone. Sub in what you know first. So 340.3392041. 1/3 stays 1/3. Pi stays pi. Do we know what r is? No, we don't. So r is going to stay r squared, but we do know the height. We want to sub that in. Sub in what you know is the first step. The second step is to divide by everything except for the letter that we're solving for. We're solving for r. So we want to divide by 1/3 times pi times 13. Make sure that you put that inside parentheses. Whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side of the equal sign. So why we're dividing by 1/3 times pi times 13 is we want to get that r squared all by itself. So that means that this 1/3 cancels out, the pi cancels out, and the 13 cancels out. All that we're left with on that right-hand side is r squared. You're going to take this and type it directly into the calculator exactly how it says. 340.3392041 divided by parentheses 1/3 times pi times 13. Close your parentheses and hit equals. When you do that, you get an answer of 25. Now, we're not done yet. Remember, we want to solve for r, not r squared. The opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. So take the square root. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. The opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root. So that's how we get that r all by itself. Second button, x squared button, 25, hit equals to do the square root. The square root of 25 is 5, because 5 times 5 is 25. Take a look at the other cone problem. In this cone problem, we are solving for the height. Again, the first thing that we want to do is sub in what we know. We know the volume, so we're going to put this volume answer in there already. The 1/3 stays 1/3. Pi stays pi. This time we know what the radius is. The radius is 1.2 squared. But this time we're solving for the height. So we subbed in what we knew. Now we want to divide by everything except for the letter that we're solving for. So the 1/3 stays 1/3. Pi stays pi. 1.2 squared stays 1.2 squared. We're solving for the h. So we want to divide that on both sides. So that means, So that means that these 1/3 cancel out. These pi's cancel out. The 1.2 squareds cancel out. All that we're left with on that right-hand side is the letter h, our height. You're going to type this directly into the calculator exactly how it says. 10.25415.842 divided by parentheses 1 divided by 3 times pi times 1.2 squared. Close your parentheses. When you do that, you get a height of 6.7999999 or 9 repeating. We are not taking the square root in this one because we have an h all by itself. We only take the square root when it says r squared. So let's take a look at a sphere. In a sphere, we have the sphere formula. We know what the volume is. The first step is still the same. The first step is to sub in what you know. So we know that the volume is 904.77868842. The 4/3 is going to stay 4/3. Pi always stays pi. We're looking for the radius. So that r is going to stay r cubed. The second step is to divide by everything except for the letter that we're solving for. So divide by 4/3 times pi. Divide by 4/3 times pi. Whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side. We have to make sure that we put these inside parentheses. If you don't, you'll get the wrong answer. So once we divide, these will cancel out and these will cancel out. All that we're left with on the right-hand side is the letter that we're looking for, that R cubed. You need to type this directly into the calculator exactly how it says. 904.7786842 divided by parentheses 4/3, 4 divided by 3, times pi, close your parentheses. When you do that, you get 216. Now, this time we have a r cubed, or r to the third power. The opposite of cubing a number is to take the cube root of a number. So to get that r all by itself, we need to take the cube root and the cube root. It looks like the squared root, but it has a 3 in it. So remember, the way that you type this into the calculator, you have to hit 3 and then the second button and then the caret button and then your number. So then 216. So 3, second button, caret button, 216. And you end up with 6 equals r. Let's take a look at another sphere question. Again, the first step is to sub in what you know. So 2,226.094855 equals 4/3 stays 4/3, pi stays pi, and r cubed stays r cubed because that's what we're looking for. Divide by everything except for the letter that you're solving for. So divide by 4/3 times pi, divide by 4/3 times pi, and we need to make sure that those are inside parentheses. Why we divided by 4/3 times pi is because then these 4/3 cancels out, these pi's cancel out. All that we're left with on that right-hand side is r cubed. You're going to type this directly into the calculator. So when you do that, 2,226.094855 divided by parentheses, 4 divided by 3 times pi, close your parentheses. We get a big, long, ugly decimal. We get 531.44009999. We now, as the last step, we have an r cubed. The opposite of cubing a number is to take the cube root of a number. So we want to take the cube root on both sides. So again, you're going to type in 3, second button, caret button, and then that big long number, that 531.44, blah, 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 blah. So when you go and do that, you should get an answer of 8.1. So that is what our radius is. Again, the steps: sub in what you know, divide by everything except for the letter that you're solving for. When you divide, you have to make sure that both sides are in parentheses. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. And then sometimes if you're solving for the height, that's just going to be your answer. If you're solving for the radius, you might have to take the square root or the cube root. And that is how you do it.